Readings in Code Administration, Volume 1, History, Philosophy, Law. Part 1, Why Building Codes. Story 2, Has Our Thinking Changed? By R. Sterling Ferguson of the National Research Council of Canada. Reprinted from Boca News, July 1956, pages 3 through 7. The intro paragraph states, "The language of old building regulations is based on direct experience, while the new language of building codes is based on methods of scientific measurement. Today's building code problems are the result of a mixture of these two incompatible languages in our regulations. To solve this problem, we must do further research to cope with the changing technology, so we can abandon the old language. A performance code, written in the new language, will help meet our objective of protecting the public health, safety, and welfare." When we think of changes in building technology, we must first ask, what are we thinking about? We are not thinking about raising costs of building or promoting materials or protecting investment. We are thinking about guarding the public's safety, health, and welfare. This has always been our aim, and in this respect, our thinking has not changed. But there has been change. Conditions around us have changed. Our problem is to know how to change our methods in keeping with the development so that we can maintain a steadfast policy with regard to safety. If we stand still or if we advance too quickly, our efforts become ineffective. We must move in step with development if public safety is to be preserved. My remarks concern the nature of development. They represent my own views. I express them here in the hope that they may assist in understanding of these changes that are taking place, and that through greater understanding, our problems can be lessened. Development in building has been phenomenal in the past few decades. We experience it through code changes. It is something bewildering to be faced, with its masses of reports, correspondence, and drafts. It seems that we can never keep up with the change or get out from underneath. Is it possible that there can be some order in this chaos? I believe it is. The thought occurs that all these changes are not representative of individual, uncorrelated developments, but are instead representative of single steps in step-by-step transformation from one way of building to another. If this is the case, there must be two ways of building, an old way going out and a new way coming in. Before conducting any study, some assumptions have to be made. If it is to be assumed that there are two ways of building, then there is something to look for. One can start by examining old building methods and old methods of regulating, and then go on to the new. If enough characteristics can be found that apply to each, then the original assumptions can, perhaps, be confirmed. My studies have not been thorough as yet, and it is therefore early to draw conclusions. Nevertheless, interesting facts have been revealed that suggest conclusions which may be substantiated by further study. The records of old building and old building regulations are few. In North America, one of the first was an early ordinance by the Pilgrims of Plymouth. The following extracts are from page 582 of the Pilgrim Republic, written by John A. Gardiner in 1888. In 1632, thatched roofs at Plymouth were ordered to be changed to boards or paling to prevent fires. In 1631, Mr. Sharp's chimney, not being well clayed, took fire, as also did his thatched roof. Wooden chimneys and thatchings were therefore forbidden at Sedham, as at Plymouth. In 1636, every household in Plymouth Colony was required to keep a ladder which would reach the top of his roof in case of fire. Hartford, Connecticut was not far behind Plymouth. An entry dated in 1636 in the Hartford Town Votes states, "It is ordered that every house shall have a ladder or tree which shall reach 2 feet from the top of the house. Upon forfeit of 5 shillings a month for each month it is lacking." Evidence suggests that the language of these regulations was the language of building, based on direct experience. Roofs, for example, were required to be made of boards. Imagine what we would get now with that specification. Compare this requirement with its modern counterpart, Class A roof coverings in fire limits. About 1650, a regulation for chimneys was passed in Quebec, and regulations for chimneys and ladders in Montreal about 50 years later. Chimneys was the subject of the first regulation in Toronto in 1834, and regulations for chimneys, ladders, and fire limits were enacted in Ottawa starting in 1857. These communities were isolated by distance and time. 2 centuries and elapsed between the founding of Quebec and Ottawa, and yet over this period, sensible uniformity existed in their building regulations. Between 1860 and 1890, the Ottawa Building Bylaw grew from 10 to 100 regulations, an increase of 900%. It was easy to amend. There was no confusion or conflict, and no basic change was made in the arrangement. This may not be the form, but these are the qualities one looks for today in performance codes. I don't imagine that the experience through the years in other towns was any different. It is most probable that the early regulations of these settlements served the needs of their day. They were based on direct experience with hazards, and their language was the building language of the day. They developed locally, were legally binding, and showed remarkable uniformity from place to place. I have found no case of administrative difficulties except in Frederickstown, where the bylaws was arbitrarily imposed and was not a natural result of real hazards. The break from this local tradition first came in Europe during the Renaissance period, when architects imported styles from Greece and Italy. This was the first evidence of scholastic building. A more recognizable science of building developed later. In 1850, Sir Joseph Paxton, a British civil engineer, designed the Crystal Palace, the first prefabricated modular building. He ushered in a new architectural age. Since 1850, the science of building has grown with remarkable speed. Books have made it possible. Building science is based on study, research, and experiment. It has provided us with many new laws and useful means of measurement. Our building needs are more varied. There are more occupancies and more types of construction. We build bigger and higher. Scientific method provides the greater flexibility we now require. For example, beam design used to be based on experience and by observation. Rules of thumbs were developed, and the ratio of the length of the beam to the depth. This left no way to account for different loads on material properties. The new method does, though such derived information as bending moment, shear, fire resistance rating, and flame spread, it is possible to apply a safe standard that is flexible enough to govern many varied conditions of design, while at the same time providing a uniform, safe minimum for all materials. The new methods of measurement are part of the new language of building. If our building codes are to continue to represent a safe minimum standard, this new language must become a part of them. At this point, I would like to review what I have said. First, we are concerned solely with public safety. This means taking any steps necessary to avoid being partisan. Second, we are in a period of technological change from one building method to another. Third, these two building methods have been examined, and each appears to have its characteristic features. Both are known to us by their characteristic language. Fourth, the early regulations seem to perform without difficulty, and it appears to follow that safety in present conditions can be maintained only through scientific methods of measurement, such as those that have already been developed. In light of this background, I now wish to discuss some present problems. Our current difficulties have arisen because scientific evolution is not complete, and we have a mixture of the old and the new languages in our building code. These two languages do not mix very well. Let me give you an example. It is general practice to require fire-resistive exterior walls as a fire break between buildings. This is a mixture of the two languages. The term fire-resistive comes from the new language, and wall comes from the old. 100 years ago, when it was just required that exterior walls be of masonry 12 inches thick, it meant just that, and authorities were able to get the protection they asked for. Now, when we require 4-hour fire-resistive exterior walls, we do not mean that at all. What we are really trying to say is that we want a barrier which will stop the fire from spreading to the adjacent buildings. Unfortunately, the language we need is only half written, so we must fall back on such words as wall. The fire-resistive part is all right. We can put this in the code and know that the designer must comply. But as soon as we say wall, he turns the whole wall into a window and thus escapes the requirement. Through such regulations, therefore, it is possible to get unprotected windows close together in adjacent buildings, and the owner has no assurance of safety, even though he still has to pay extra for fire resistance in the portion of the exterior face that remains a wall. This is unsafe, uneconomical, unfair, and inflexible. It encourages designers to specify more glass than is prudent, and so stimulates bad design. In the light of our basic principles, these are serious charges. This problem is not so new that it hasn't yet received attention. Many code writing authorities are aware of it and have done something about it. To some extent, flexibility and economy have regained by varying the fire resistance according to the need. Safety has been assured by additional regulations for protection of windows. But these measurements are still uncorrelated, stopgap devices, leading to cross-reference confusion and difficulty in administration. The real solution will come only when the real hazards are identified and adequate means of scientific measurement developed to govern them. Such a solution is now being studied. The Bureau of Standards in Washington has published data on the fire load of certain occupancies. This is a guide for measuring fire severity. Studies of radiation can help determine safe distances between buildings. From this and other information, regulations can be developed permitting structural or distance protection consistent with the hazard associated with any particular occupancy. These regulations would avoid mentioning such troublesome words as walls. Distance or fire resistance could be required. Thus, where distance was insufficient, a complete fire barrier would ensure safety. Where there was adequate distance, increased flexibility and economy would be achieved. One cannot sit down now and prepare a complete code along these lines. For one thing, some, if not many, of the old rule of thumb practices still exist. Even where new methods of measurement could be used, they are not, in many cases, available. There is a great deal of research to do first, and then much work lies ahead before an adequate form of measurement is evolved. In many cases, test procedures have to be developed. Probably the latest form of measurement to be developed is the flame spread test. These changes I have predicted are merely examples of many more changes to come. Looking further into the future, it is likely that occupancy will be classified according to rooms rather than buildings. There will be a continuing trend to segregate loads, design relationships, and material requirements. Type of construction and fire protection will probably disappear, and heights and areas may succumb to some kind of formula. When these changes occur, the form and language in our codes will be quite different. Some new chapters will have been added, and others will disappear. Those that disappear are certain to be the most contentious. When they go, the problems associated with them will disappear also. What we must do is ensure that the new chapters coming in are sufficiently in keeping with contemporary building so as not to bring new troubles with them. The other day I was reading a book called Early British Railroads, and I was reminded of the early safety precautions that, you will remember, required a man on horseback carrying a lantern to precede the locomotive on the rails. We may smile at this now, but 100 years from now people may laugh at us. My plea today is that we devote greater time and energy to this problem and be prepared for change. We must climb off that horse and take hold of the throttle. We cannot be blamed for not having all the answers, but our consciences can't be clear unless we have expended all available energy in coping with change.